The Red Bull situation is just confusing me at this point, and now Daniel Ricciardo said his piece, and all it's done is succeed in confusing me even more. He's essentially said he will understand if he has to leave, and yet he doesn't want to leave. Can you see the bind I'm in here? I don't think anyone at Red Bull knows exactly what's going on with their lineup. I think we're all fed up with the situation going on at the team. The team once known for being the rambunctious and renegade team, taking the incredibly safe option in keeping Sergio Perez for just that little bit longer, seemingly to the shock of all concerned, except Christian Horner, of course. From all of the talk that's been going around the internet, all of the wacky rumours right here, which would require the foam of doubt just to say that it is a bit of a tinfoil hat theory, supposedly, after the Belgian Grand Prix, Verstappen and Ricciardo took a helicopter from the track, in the belief that they were going to be teammates once more, and then not long after that finding out that, that wasn't the case. That Daniel will stay exactly where he is for the time being, and the clock is ticking from Liam Lawson to secure a seat for 2025, with the team that supposedly promised him a seat running out of time to secure him. In short, you could say Liam is a case of use it or lose it. Now, that's all very well and good about Liam Lawson. Everyone's talked about him becoming a free agent for next year, but the real enigma at the moment is Daniel Ricciardo. I don't think he has a clue what's going on at the team that he hoped would be an easy assurance in getting to Red Bull after serving a little bit of time at the second team. He hasn't exactly set the world alight in his time back in a full-time F1 seat, and yet he hasn't been absolutely terrible. Especially in the last few races, he's been fairly decent. He's been quite punchy, in fact. When it comes to certain moments, he looks odds-on for a decent clutch of points and a fairly reasonable qualifying, not that far behind or similar to Yuki Tsunoda. Only for pit stop strategies to really get in the way, like at the Hungarian Grand Prix. He could have capitalised on a top 10 finish, and they didn't because they took an overly cautious strategy, and then got bamboozled by Aston Martin. Oops. And everyone was expecting Daniel Ricciardo to substitute in for Sergio Perez at the back end of 2024, just to try and ensure that Red Bull kept their place at the Constructors' Championship. Not try and break away to like 100 points or something like that, but just be that little bit extra to ensure that McLaren didn't chew into their lead any more than was necessary. And in turn, that could potentially mean that the Red Bull Junior program kickstarts again once more, and then all is absolutely hunky-dory. But now he has given an interview, Daniel, to Racing News 365, and it's really just made me feel perplexed as to what's going on, and I think even he knows it, and he's sort of vocalising a very defensive strategy. This is exactly what he said. Look, I also know what it's like to be a junior, and a young kid that's hungry and wants that chance to get into the sport. I've been there, and it doesn't feel like that long ago. And look, I also respect that. So the day I feel like I'm occupying a seat that I can't fill, I won't be comfortable within myself. I won't want to be here. I don't want to stop someone having their chance. I respect the journey too much. But equally, I don't feel like I'm in that place, and the day I do, I will probably speak openly about it. Right now, I guess talking a year ago like this is my last chance, so that's how I view it. I will give it everything I have got, and the juniors will have their chance in their time, but I don't feel ready to hand it over. If my results frickin' suck, that's what he said, and whatever, then so be it, and that will happen, but I personally don't feel like I'm there yet, because I feel like I'm also too honest with myself. I think I would feel uncomfortable occupying a seat if I really didn't feel my heart was in it anymore. They'll get that chance, but not yet. Can you tell how many times Daniel's basically said, "Oh yeah, sorry fella, I like where I am, thank you." He said that like 4 times justifying the situation. Can you tell he really wants to stay there? Oh dear, we're headed toward the age-old debate of when is a junior team not a junior team. Short answer, when it's doing well. Now that I've actually looked back at the time of Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, and now Racing Bulls, whenever the team is doing fairly well, they usually refer to it as a sister team. And when it's like 8th, 9th, 10th or something like that, they usually refer to it as a junior team. It's a bit of a get-out clause in the way. If the team's not doing well, then it's like, oh, well, they got junior drivers, it's to be expected, they're just cutting their teeth, it's fine. And when they're doing really well, oh, it's a sister team, we're really impressed by that. I think I heard that on the year when Toro Rosso actually beat Red Bull in the Constructors. That's the year of Sebastian Vettel in 2008. And also, it's used at the start of a rebrand to really reaffirm the purpose of the team. And it's also not helped when Helmut Marko and Peter Bayer, that's the team's CEO by the way, are constantly at each other's throats in regards to the team's definition and identity. And it really doesn't help their case when one of their drivers is really making it clear that he will not budge from that seat until he feels ready to do so. And based on what the management is doing at that team, they're not overly bothered about getting rid of him. No, Peter Bear absolutely loves Daniel, and ever since he took on the role of the Faenza team's leader, he's not been shy in expressing how much he absolutely adores the Australian. According to Bear, Ricciardo is a very important linchpin in the entire operation, and to remove him would be going against the bigger picture, and that the main goal of the shareholders is to ensure that the team is fairly competitive and not in last place. Peter, you needn't worry about that. The least green machine, that is Sauber, is very much occupying that seat. In regards to Daniel's earlier comments, you get the sense that there is some kind of grandmaster plan of Horner's that he would ideally like to execute right now, in which Daniel and Max get back together again, and the team can pretend that the musical chairs of the second Red Bull seat over the last 6 or 7 years never happened. As far as Christian's concerned, Daniel would be just a placeholder, but a very marketable and popular placeholder. Daniel and Max would be back together again. Social media will be all abuzz and everyone will be happy. And that means that when the time is right for Red Bull Jr. to take up the mantle next to Max, or if Max moves on wherever it is or into another sport entirely, then it will all be natural. It will be just a state of progression. All is well, it's organic. But unfortunately, due to recent events, that has sadly not happened, and it means that the plan has now been delayed even more, and things are just going to get all the more awkward, especially if Red Bull lose the constructors. The team is looking incredibly stagnant. They're no longer the dynamic buzz whiz kids that they were back in the day, or heck, even just a few years ago when all was running well with the junior team. You just get a sense that all of the junior drivers, even the ones that have survived the cull of last year, have got nowhere to go. All because 2 older drivers have expressed loyalty and support to Christian Horner when he needed it most. They've been granted a stay of execution, which the Red Bull of just a few years ago would not have tolerated. But I think it's the first time in their history they've actually experienced a driver with major sponsors in their books, and it's quite addictive. Oh, and exposing them to a brand new sector in the market and an entire region of the world. Yeah, that'll do that to you. And it's also very important to understand that this is a very major era of Formula One where there are a lot of big name sponsors coming into the fray. And to have marketable drivers with very little baggage, that's kind of an important thing because we're now seeing the major fintech companies coming into the actual arena with American Express, then there's Visa, and now of course there's MasterCard who have partnered up with McLaren to eventually make up MasterCard McLaren Mercedes. Tasty. Oh yeah, he's part of the bigger picture alright, as well as being part of a bigger bottom line, but it's not just that. Bayer points out that Ricciardo also is incredibly significant in the development of a certain Yuki Tsunoda. Yeah, it's true. Apparently Yuki Tsunoda needs more development time, more time in the oven, which is a very fitting analogy, considering Yuki Tsunoda does like to cook. And now this seemingly is a perfect excuse in batting off the criticism that Racing Bulls is not a junior team anymore, because it's like, oh look, it's a young driver and an old driver. The old driver is teaching the young driver things. There you go, problem solved. But we're getting to this point now of when is a junior driver not a junior driver? Because yeah, I get it. Yuki is what, like 24? That's pretty young, but he's also driven in a lot more Grand Prix and is older than Pierre Gasly and Alex Albon were when they were given the opportunity to partner Max Verstappen at Red Bull. So, okay. The team reckons he's in need of learning more about F1, and according to Sportsmole, the main focus of the F1 team's training now is very much in the hands of Daniel. Bayer believes that Yuki needs to concentrate on technical feedback, controlling his emotions, as well as properly putting together a game plan for the entire weekend's racing and strategy, him being likened to a diamond in the rough, which Ricciardo is responsible for polishing. That is a very interesting way of completely just ignoring all of the other junior drivers on Red Bull's docket, and instead just focusing on the one guy who has been the de facto Red Bull F1 junior since 2021. There has been nobody else coming in, except Liam Lawson when he subbed in for Daniel, but no. What they're doing right now is just saying, oh, well, we have a junior. We have one at home, and his name is Yuki, and Daniel's here because he's training him up. I get that, okay, but that's just not the way Toro Rosso worked at all. They just threw 2 junior drivers in at the same time and saw which ones swam and which ones sunk. That's just the way it went. It was cutthroat, but it was effective. Okay, if the team is justifying this model and keeping Daniel for the foreseeable future, if he's not going to get to Red Bull, then we're probably going to be having to wait until 2026 to see the next Red Bull Junior coming in, because we don't know at all what's going to be happening with Yuki Tsunoda once the Honda and Red Bull partnership completely dries up and they move on to Aston Martin. Does Yuki move on as well? Has he done enough to remain with the Red Bull fold and then eschew and get rid of his Honda connections? And then if Checo's dropped, Daniel stays with Racing Bulls, and the likes of Liam Lawson is swooped into the top team next to Max ahead of Yuki, then it completely negates the point of what Bayer just said. What would have been the point of training Yuki up to then just have Liam come over and just completely snub him? It would have just been a wasted time, unless it turns out Yuki's just gonna then become the next Daniel, and then Yuki is responsible in training up the next Red Bull Juniors, being it Liam Lawson, Isaac Hajar, Arvid Lindblad, the list goes on. He will be the new Ricciardo, and then Ricciardo, well, I don't know what will happen to him in that regard. But I seriously just ask you to wait and see what happens when the Honda partnership ends and the Ford partnership kicks in. And even though Yuki says he's the happiest he's ever been in F1, there must be a lingering doubt in regards to his long-term future with the team. It does make me think what will happen when Aston Martin partner up with Honda. What does he do? Does Tsunoda become their reserve driver as part of the Aston Martin driver program? Or does he become a main driver alongside Alonso and Stroll moves on to pastures new with the hypercar division? Or he doesn't and Alonso retires. But then you hear that Aston Martin are the favourites to secure the services of Adrian Newey, and that means that Fernando Alonso will stay for as long as necessary to be driving an Adrian Newey designed car. You know that's going to happen. There may be no room for Yuki, and it's all down to the fact that Red Bull just simply won't promote the guy because he's done the time. But to be fair though, what they are doing with Daniel and Yuki is producing something worthwhile. This isn't all marketing and PR gymnastics here. They are making use of Ricciardo's presence in the sense that if there is one thing that he is good at, it's diffusing arguments and handling his emotions on camera very well during race weekends. I think it's a really rare occurrence to see Daniel truly angry, seething, raising his voice, shouting, and when you do hear it, it's very effective. Instead of just hearing a guy who's angry all the time, shouting all the time, it starts to lose all meaning. Kind of like what Yuki had during his rookie year. At first it was really endearing that the little Japanese man would shout and curse all the time, but then by the following year it became tiresome and old and people were just bored and just wanting him to leave. Fortunately now, Yuki has been able to temper that, but he does have his outbursts, so yeah, it's a really hard habit to get rid of. And sure, sometimes Daniel's words could become a little bit more colourful and a bit spicy, but his overall tone remains somewhat constant, and he picks his words carefully in the media pen whilst also conveying his irritation. And when you look at that, it is producing results. It is working. Yuki Tsunoda is far calmer than he was even just a year ago. With Daniel present, he's there to be some sort of calming influence, a realization that, hey, sometimes just flying off the handle doesn't work, and you just got to keep yourself measured. Because that whole post-race spat in Bahrain could have easily escalated into something absolutely awful for the team. But fortunately, Daniel was aware of this and was able to tell Yuki, look, this is just getting stupid, it's going to tear us apart, let's just draw a line on that and just go from there, okay? And fortunately, it hasn't gone anywhere, and the two drivers do work well together, so you got to give Daniel that. He's really good at diplomacy. And it's really rare for any drivers up and down the grid to have a continued grudge against him. I mean, unless you're Lance Stroll, of course, or Jack Villeneuve. So yeah, that's a perfectly valid reason in keeping Daniel around for a little bit longer, but he can't keep being Yuki's teacher forever. There is going to come a time when either a blisteringly quick junior driver comes through F3 or F2, or a blisteringly quick F1 driver comes along and then is readily available for Red Bull to pilfer. Because as we saw with Sergio Perez, they are not afraid of looking at outside talent, and Christian Horner has illustrated that before as well, that they won't mind looking at other drivers from other teams. And even though I hope Oscar Piastriand will remain at McLaren for the rest of his days, the connections that Mark Webber has with Red Bull seem to be still in good health with him being part of their Goodwood festivities for their 20th anniversary, and it does make me think, if McLaren chooses to stick with Lando through thick and thin, and there is simply no room for Oscar Piastri to develop and grow and learn and teach, then Piastri could easily move to Red Bull. Marco has said very clearly that Oscar is one of the big talents out there, and Mark Webber is very shrewd when it comes to contracts. He proved it at Alpine that if the situation isn't ideal for his driver, he will find somewhere else that will want him and be able to give him everything he needs to reach his full potential. Who knows what might happen at Red Bull in a couple of years' time? Maybe Max Verstappen has moved on to Mercedes, or he's moved on to a completely different sport, maybe taking up his passions for endurance racing and they need a new leader. Piastri becomes available at the end of 2026, 2027 comes along. Sorry if I'm going on about Oscar, but it's a real possible scenario. because I feel like if they did do that, it would truly end any chance of Daniel getting into that top seat legitimately. As for a junior existing in the Red Bull camp, you've got Isaac Hajar leading F2 and Arvid Lindblad making a name for himself in F3 this year, with the latter undoubtedly getting moved up to F2 for next year. And of course, it might also end the opportunities for Pepe Marti in F2, because the gap between him and Hajar in the championship, it's not good. And then comes in a major problem, because in F2, if you win the championship, you cannot take part in that championship the following year. If Isaac Hajar, who's currently leading the championship, does go on to win it, then he's got to go and find something else to do. Whether it's going to Super Formula, because Red Bull does like to do that in recent years, or he becomes a reserve driver at Racing Bulls, it's going to be a year of either in a completely different formula, away from the media, the main spotlight of European motorsport journalism, or he's going to be ending up in the backrooms of Racing Bulls or Red Bull itself, and then just having to wait his turn, which may or may never come. I mean, you would expect that the natural order would mean that Tsunoda and Hajar would be working together at the second team, but can you imagine Yuki teaching Isaac how to control himself and behave like a really well-adjusted F1 driver? In fact, you could easily say that Hajar makes Yuki look like an absolute teddy bear. Which then brings us back to Daniel. Whilst I don't think he's slow, and he does have a place in F1 for the time being, he is currently in a holding pattern of his own choice. Him having information about where the chips will lie in the not too distant future, but the team not able to act upon it through external factors. Because you can easily tell that there was a plan which didn't get carried out, which may not get carried out until next year, or maybe just a few more races time, we don't know. But there was a real sense that something was in motion. He seemed happy, cheery, for only getting 11th on the road. And then he and Max go off in that helicopter. It all seemed pretty much assured that he had managed to get the prize that he had wanted when he came back to Red Bull, and all would be well. And that means the Red Bull Junior team could carry on anew, but then it didn't happen, and we're back to square one. Because it was obvious, Daniel was aware that Checo had not met expectations. Sergio Perez was meant to reach a certain point at the summer break, and he didn't do it. He started on the front row, he fell back to 8th. And all of the smoke and mirrors of what Christian Horner's been saying, that, oh, we're going to have a sit down and a cup of tea and talk through the problems, I bet you that in this season of Drive to Survive that's coming up, we are going to have a couple of scenes of Checo and Christian having a cuppa in Christian's kitchen, because we do see a lot of Horner's house in that series, and Christian will be just sitting there and going, okay, Checo, what's up? You can tell me, and maybe a few million people. But that's gonna happen! And I wouldn't blame Daniel for feeling really confused at the moment. He will wait until Red Bull makes up their mind, sure, and he'll pray that the team sees sense and select him for the main team next year. But he is bullish in remaining where he is for the time being, as he says that nobody will tell him what to do, other than himself, and that he will tell everyone when it's time for him to move on with his life outside of F1. But then at the same time, he was saying that at McLaren, and look how that turned out for him. And as for Liam Lawson, my goodness, he's already proved himself he is capable of racing an F1 car alongside Yuki. He's done that. He's already proved it, so why shouldn't he get the opportunity? And it's quite clear now that the deal that Marco made with Lawson is really going to come back to bite him. He is absolutely seeding Helmut right now. He probably thought that 18 months ago, when he cut that deal, that, oh, by 2025, if you haven't got a Red Bull seat, you can leave. Oh, that seemed far, far away. That, of course, it was going to happen. But then it didn't happen, and now it's going to be binding, and we might find ourselves in a situation where Liam Lawson is racing for maybe Sauber or something like that, or maybe another team entirely, because he is an interesting prospect, don't get me wrong. Then they're going to have to train up Hajar from scratch, or maybe wait for Lindblad to suddenly come good, because if Lindblad does get the F3 title and the F2 title back-to-back, then they have to promote him. That's what Piastri did. F3 and F2 back-to-back. They can't miss out on that like Alpine did. But the team does rate Yuki's appeal with younger F1 fans, and Liam's doing the same thing with the same demographic, as well as him making a name for himself on social media on his own, so surely, if they want to appeal to younger fans who are coming into the sport, then this team should really be leaping on this opportunity for both people, since the branding is completely anonymous and very anti-fan. The way that the two Red Bull teams are conducting themselves, in my opinion, is just completely wrong and backwards. Look, I don't care at this point if Max and Daniel are at Red Bull racing together. I do not give a hoot about that anymore. Let them do that. Let them make loads of money and loads of PR positivity. I just want the sister team or the junior team or whatever to be going back to its intended purpose of having two junior drivers in there cutting their teeth in Formula 1 and seeing which one survives after 2 seasons. If one doesn't, they get chucked, and if one does, then they can hold off for a 3rd season and wait to see if there's room at the top team, should Max and Daniel move on themselves. But I just can't see the junior drivers getting a fair shout at the moment of an F1 drive, and the future of Yuki still looks cloudy. And based on all the investment and time and patience the team is ploughing into him, could we really expect them to retain him after the Honda deal ends, or is this all short-term thinking? One thing is for sure though, based on the fact that the CEO of Racing Bulls loves Daniel, and Daniel is doing okay, he's not going anywhere unless he has an absolute mardy of a back end of 2024. It's quite obvious that Christian is the Honey Badger's handler, and Daniel is just seething at the bit, trying to warn off any people thinking that his time in F1's done. And Christian's going, easy there, Daniel, easy, just wait your turn, it'll come. Just wait for them to do their thing and make it absolutely untenable. Ooh. Meanwhile, at the top team, it's clear that things are beginning to turn for them as well, and not necessarily in a good way. And to find out why I reckon that particular invertebrate has done a little bit of a loop-de-loop somewhat, go and watch this video next, and I shall see you there. All will be explained, including the phrase.